Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Millennial Project. Today I want to talk about media bias and more specifically how to break out of media bias. I think most of us are pretty aware that a lot of the media coverage that we see on a day-to-day basis is somewhat biased. It's coming through some sort of a filter to kind of cater to a specific audience. This obviously isn't great for crossing the partisan divide that now is also very well known in our country. And so the question kind of becomes, how do we break out of this bias? How do we find a way to get a more comprehensive, a deeper look at issues, a look that can help us, build coalitions across what is a very, partisan environment in politics right now. I think this is a crucial question for millennials who don't seem to be super jazzed about, either side of the aisle, either the right or the left. They seem to be kind of disenchanted with the whole process, and I think the partisanship and the lack of tangible progress on addressing a wide range of issues is one of the reasons for that disenchantment. So what can we do to actually get around this media bias? Well, I don't have all the answers, but I can tell you that I have found at least one method that has helped me get deeper and more comprehensive coverage on issues. And this method is listening to think tank podcasts. So a lot of people, when they hear think tanks, they think like stuffy research institution with a lot of academics with really long and boring events or long and boring reports. And while there is a little bit of that in the think tank world, what is really cool is that these think tanks are now putting out podcasts, many of which are produced like radio shows that kind of offer a window into the work they're doing. And then if you like the expert that you heard kind of interviewed or something like that, you can then kind of go and find the event podcast or the actual report that this person put together, and you can get deeper and deeper into an issue. So I listen to these things all the time when I'm getting ready, when I'm walking the dog, when I'm on the train, when I'm in the car. I think it's just super, super helpful information. I have found that per minute watched or per minute listened to, these podcasts give me just a lot better and more workable information about issues. When I listen to CNN, because I do have Sirius XM in my car, so I'm able to listen to like CNN and Fox and stuff. So when I listen to those news channels while I'm driving, I find myself just kind of like put off by the constant repetitive, partisan arguments that don't seem to go very deep, that seem to basically just like repeat talking points that we've been hearing for months about issues. These think tank podcasts are not quite like that. Again, they go a little bit deeper. What's really cool about how academics tend to talk about this stuff is that they usually give you a little bit of background on an issue, some history, some kind of dates and events that you can Google and kind of look into more yourself if you want. They then will give you different perspectives about how the issue is being looked at a lot of times, and then they might nudge you in a direction that they think is appropriate for, actually continuing to understand the issue or solve the issue. But I think that is just so much more effective in contextualizing issues and getting the information that we all need to start making more intelligent political decisions as millennials. So hopefully I have sold you on this whole think tank podcast thing. What I was hoping to do for the rest of the video is just sort of run through some of the podcasts that are in my orbit that I have found helpful in understanding the world around me. So basically I engage with, I'd say like 5 think tanks regularly. The first one, and the one that by far I engage with the most, is the Brookings Institution. Brookings is one of the oldest think tanks in the United States. It may even be the oldest. People don't seem to be totally sure on that. But the long and short of it is that Brookings has been around for over 100 years. They've been involved in a ton of really important policy making since they were founded. So Brookings does skew center and a tiny bit left and a tiny bit internationalist. So that's just good to keep in mind. But what I love about Brookings is the Brookings Cafeteria podcast. It is produced really well. It's a lot like an NPR show. As I kind of mentioned earlier, some of the podcasts are like that, but this one is really the one that I think of when I think of the like think tank NPR style show. Again, what they do is they often have experts in who have recently published or who have important stuff to say. And then if you like what you hear, you can usually follow up on, whatever you want with reports and podcasts that are events and stuff like that. So Brookings has some other stuff, but I think the Cafeteria podcast is a good place to start there. So the second think tank, whose podcast that I listen to all the time, is the Council on Foreign Relations. They have 2 really great weekly podcasts. One is The World Next Week, which talks about the kind of global affairs that are occurring in the world in the coming week. I think this is an absolutely essential podcast for any millennial that wants to sort of break out of the American-centric view of the world and try to understand what is happening in the rest of the world, what is kind of going on outside of our borders, that wants to sort of understand politics on a global level. The next one is called The President's Inbox, and that is really interesting. It is basically just 2 experts who talk about various issues that the president will have to be dealing with, basically issues that are in the president's inbox, so to speak. The next institution that I engage with all the time is the Center for Strategic and International Studies. They They do a ton of defense stuff, security policy. Also, if you happen to be interested in like aid and development issues, they do a ton of stuff on that as well. So the Center for Strategic and International Studies actually has a really active YouTube channel. And so I subscribe to the channel. I listen to their events all the time, kind of while I'm getting ready in the morning. And one of the really interesting things that they talked about, I guess it was not too recently, but one of the ones that really has stuck with me is this event that they did on the situation in the South China Sea. So this kind of tension surrounding China building on these various islands in the South China Sea. They had all these experts come in and talk about, what is going on with that, the kind of strategic situation, what the United States could do to escalate or de-escalate the situation, all stuff like that. Really interesting. I walked away from that feeling like I really understood what was going on in the South China Sea. So the next think tank that I engage with all the time is the Cato Institute, and they do a ton of really interesting stuff from a libertarian angle. So that is like socially liberal, fiscally conservative. They are all about small government, less spending, and avoiding foreign entanglements. This is stuff like foreign wars, stuff like that. They do a lot of really interesting research on marijuana legalization, on privacy issues like cybersecurity privacy issues like NSA spying, that type of thing. And in addition to that, they have basically a daily podcast that literally comes out, I think, like every single day. So I've gotten it on Sundays before. Basically, if you're looking for a podcast, there will be one from the Cato Institute. So it's always good to have that in the mix to get that kind of younger, conservative, kind of libertarian component of what might be going on out there in the world and politics. So the last think tank that I wanted to mention is the American Enterprise Institute. I don't actually listen to their podcast that often, but I think it's really important to mention here to have a conservative establishment voice in this kind of menu of options to choose from for podcasts. I know Brookings, again, skews a little bit liberal, so I wanted to balance that out with the American Enterprise Institute. And libertarian is, interesting, but it doesn't really represent the conservative establishment. So that is why I'm talking about the American Enterprise Institute. Definitely worth checking out. Although they are kind of conservative establishment, you might be kind of surprised by some of the stuff that they talk about. I've heard them advocate for a universal basic income and some other kind of interesting things that you might not assume would come out of the conservative side. Okay, so there is one last set of podcasts that I do want to talk about, but they aren't think tank podcasts, and these come out of Politico. So obviously Politico is a news organization. They are pretty on the money when it comes to reporting in Washington, D.C. When I worked on the Hill, reading Politico was pretty essential. I would often read things in Politico that would eventually play out later in the day or later in the week. So things that were like predicted or kind of insights that might have been reported via Politico. So ever since then, I've kept my eye on them, and they have kind of brought their reputation for hard-hitting and very accurate reporting to their podcasts. So the ones that I listen to are the Politico Nerdcast podcast, and that is basically a reporter roundtable where various people who work at Politico get together and talk about kind of the week's stories. And I think that this is so valuable because it helps viewers, or I guess I should say listeners, get a really good grounding in, the talking points and the kind of plays that each side are making every week. So I think that that's really helpful. It's helped me kind of avoid being taken advantage of by talking points when I've been listening to coverage in other places. I really like that podcast, and they tend to be pretty unbiased and, pretty neutral in the way that they look at a lot of these issues. The second podcast that comes out of Politico that I really do enjoy is the Global Politico, and that is an interview series. It's only had a few episodes, but they have been just totally spot on. They were in Kurdistan recently. They were also interviewing a guy from the State Department recently who had worked there for like 40 years, I think, and then basically left because of Trump. So he talked a lot about the foreign policy accomplishments of the last two generations and how the State Department is now kind of working to pass the baton off to millennials like you and me, who are starting to kind of get old enough and experienced enough to start directing some of this important foreign policy stuff. In a similar sense, there is the Politico Off Message podcast, which used to be hosted by Glenn Thrush. Glenn Thrush has since gone to the New York Times, so it has a new host. But much like the Global Politico, the Off Message podcast really gets you in the room with some of these important DC policymakers. This one is more focused on domestic policy, on domestic issues, on domestic players. But basically, they get you in the room with like congressmen, senators, campaign staffers, and they basically let people talk about their background a little bit, why they think what they think and what they're kind of working on in their jobs. So really worth looking looking at in order to get some context and some kind of interesting, background on some of these people that you might hear about in the news every day. So those are the podcasts that I listen to on a daily basis. As we get back to trying to understand how to break through media bias, I think what these podcasts really show is that there is a way to access different information that goes a little bit deeper, that offers more comprehensive looks at issues, and information that really draws on solutions that maybe you don't hear about every day in the day-to-day kind of media coverage of issues. With that in mind, feel free to let me know if you like these podcasts, if you're listening to these podcasts, if maybe I left any good ones out, and feel free to put all that info in the comment section. I think it's great to have a place kind of below this video where people can hopefully start talking about ways to get around media bias. It would also be great if you have any other tips for getting around media bias, maybe something that has nothing to do with think tanks. Feel free to throw that tip into the comment section as well. All right, that's pretty much all I have. If you like what you saw today, feel free to stay up to date with the Millennial Project's latest videos by subscribing to the show on YouTube or liking the page on Facebook. Also, if you want to support the Millennial Project and you're already on board, one of the best things that you can do and one of the most helpful things is sharing what we're doing with your friends on social media. It always is super, super helpful. All right, that really is all I have. Until next time, this is Andrew Davis for the Millennial Project.